Good morning, Vietnam. Here I am back again. Yesterday I posted a video and was very critical of the writer, Emma Goldman. To say it was hopeless is to put it mildly. But today I noticed another article in the New York Times, and it is titled Puerto Rico. Kamala Harris's epic fail in Puerto Rico. And it's written by a woman, a Puerto Rican herself, Yarima Bonilla. She has a PhD in, I forget what, I looked her up. I'm sure she is a US citizen now, having got her master's and PhD in America. And it is an article that is very well written, thought out, but nowhere near gives enough criticism and enough information to really attack Kamala Harris and US governments in general, especially after the hurricane in late 2017. Anyway, if you enjoy this, my podcast, please like and subscribe. So this article was written yesterday, and I'm going to read a lot of the time as well as give my opinion, and I'm going to try and keep it to 20 minutes. So Dr. Bonilla, as I said, she has a PhD. She covers race, history, pop culture, and the American Empire. So this time she's covering a trip that Kamala Harris did last Friday, a week ago, by my time, which I'm again in Vietnam. And it was on the 22nd that Ms. Harris was in Puerto Rico. And we know that Ms. Harris is the Vice President of the USA, of course. And Ms. Bonilla is quite critical of Kamala Harris's visit, as she should be. What's interesting is that Ms. Harris's visit to San Juan in Puerto Rico was barely covered in the US. There are some articles. The main two were in the LA Times, which had a very short article. And to quickly read, Kamala Harris visited Puerto Rico on Friday as part of a whirlwind trip to tout the federal aid and the US territory has received following deadly hurricanes, and to attend a Democratic fundraiser, which Ms. Bonilla is very critical of. And of course, so am I. It was Harris's first visit to Puerto Rico as vice president. She visited as a US senator in 2017 after Hurricane Irma and Maria pummeled the island. And actually, the island was left without power. Oh, I should have checked. Anyway, a long time, many, many weeks. And also an article from NBCnews.com, which of course, anything I quote from, I give the reference online that you can look up the whole article yourselves. I've taken only one line from this article. Harris's trip comes a week after First Lady Jill Biden visited Puerto Rico. And of course, I guess Miss Biden wasn't the woman to go, so they sent another woman who was obviously a bit stronger, has more presence in front of cameras, knows how to shake hands better, and she got the job done because apparently she raised $500,000. Going back to Miss Bonilla, or is Bonilla, depending on where you learn Spanish from. Miss Harris's 5-hour visit began in the community of San Isidro. She visited an 86-year-old woman. It was a curious choice. Many of the residents lack land titles, which made them ineligible for the Federal Emergency Management Agency programs Miss Harris aimed to promote. So many people cannot get the aid anyway because they built on flood zones. It originally started as an informal settlement built on public wetlands by those displaced after Hurricane Hugo in 1989. So, I mean, people do build in stupid places anywhere in the world. Just look at Florida. Of course, the HUD funds come with a new, FEMA flood map, which means that 250,000 homes are not eligible for the money anyway. And it took 7 years, remember it was late 2017, so it's 6.5 years, that this 86-year-old woman's house finally got built. And apparently they're going to be able to withstand the next hurricane. Now, this is where it gets, I find her article very weak, is that she's only focused on 2 or 3 issues having to do with Puerto Rico, and we'll get to that a little later. But then she writes, while the Trump administration may have left Puerto Ricans in the dark, as I mentioned, the hurricane cut out the power for, I think, quite a few months. Left Puerto Ricans in the dark after the hurricane. It was the Democrats who set the stage for the storm's disastrous aftermath. And I've highlighted, things might have turned out differently had the Obama administration fairly confronted Puerto Rico's financial crisis by offering debt relief, addressing historical injustices, and protecting essential services rather than saddling residents with a federally appointed fiscal control board that has only caused more harm. More on that board later. The blame goes on the US government. The US government took over Puerto Rico back in 1889 after the Spanish Civil War, when the US government took over the Philippines. I did not check how they were related. But it has been a protectorate ever since and has failed to become a statehood ever since, and I'll talk a bit about that later, what I think why that has turned out that way. So the blame rests on every administration. But in terms of the current major problems faced by Puerto Ricans, it is the Trump administration that caused it. And there's a few articles, and I've referenced them just now in where I'm at in the article. And I write, this is a big if. As we know how government works, no way Obama was going to do anything. Not enough political capital. He thought codifying abortion into law before he was elected was a great selling point, and it was. But after he got elected, as I've said in 2 other podcasts I've done, he said it was the wrong time. Also, I've attached a very critical article on that fiscal control board later on. As I've gone back and forth in the article, I have repeated myself. Also, an article in NBCnews.com. This article spells out the Trump administration's total lack of empathy and action after the hurricane. I mean, the guy is just Trump, absolutely despicable. I mean, scumbag to the hilt. And has an article titled, "New Probe Confirms Trump Officials Block Puerto Rico from Receiving Hurricane Aid." I mean, wouldn't the people be much happier today if they got all this aid and got the power up and running almost immediately after? I even remember an article I read at that time, a few months after the hurricane, how somehow some power company was given the contract and there was like 5 people working for the company and they were going to rebuild the electrical infrastructure for the whole of Puerto Rico. I mean, that's how corrupt that scumbag Trump is. And of course, the main heading under this article is, the Trump administration also obstructed an investigation looking into why it was depriving the US territory of congressionally approved funds, the report found. Ms. Bonilla goes on, under Trump, Congress had approved a total of $20 billion in HUD funds. But the agency stalled the release of the aid in 2019 under Trump and imposed additional restrictions and requirements last year on how Puerto Rico could gain access to the funds, citing corruption and financial mismanagement concerns. Of course, as I pointed out next, Texas and Florida had similar issues and their funds were not held up after natural disasters. Because, I forgot, I read in this research, Trump got really pissed off about something, so he withheld the aid. I can't remember what it was. Yeah, we know how he's fickle and everything is so personal to him if you attack him in any way. I write, also below the tax incentives were originally written in 2019 under Trump. This has to do with the this new Title 60 that I'll talk a little bit about that later, where foreigners, Americans, can go and save a lot of taxes if they live for 6 months of the year in Puerto Rico. But of course, Biden did not have to accept them. Biden Biden could not renegotiate the withdrawal deal with the Taliban. That also was decided by Trump, even though he gets blamed for it. Also, Clinton could not have signed the treaty NAFTA between Canada, USA, and Mexico. He could have refused to sign it and renegotiated it, but he didn't, even though it was actually written by George Walker Hoover Bush, the first Bush president. And of course, as we know, or if you're old enough like I am and lived in the US during that time, it led to millions of job losses, and they all went south to Mexico. And of course, less than 20 years later, after the signing, most of those jobs were shipped off from Mexico to China, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, because labor was cheaper. All in a President Day's work in destroying the middle and lower class citizens of the USA. In this case, Puerto Rico has even less power because it's not a state and they don't have the right to vote in presidential elections, therefore they don't have any senators to help support them. So then I have a number of points on what NAFTA was and what it was supposed to do. And as I mentioned, all the jobs went south and then they moved on, of course. And as I write, of course, the only thing that happened is large corporations got richer, then moved on. And of course, left this massive destruction especially in the northern part of Mexico, where they built all these factories and now they're all lying there empty. I'll try not to read too much, but quoting, while on the campaign trail, Joe Biden pledged to reverse the austerity policies imposed by the fiscal board and to support an audit of Puerto Rico's debt to identity any illegally issued debt. These promises, like Obama's with abortion, fell by the wayside once he was in office. Even though this board acknowledged that much of the island's debt is invalid. She writes, the board operates with a chilling lack of oversight. And this is the most important part, of course. The Supreme Court ruled just recently that its members are exempt from standard federal appointment procedures, given the territorial nature of their duties. In other words, because it's not a state, the argument is that they can't be, you can't look at their books to find out how they're making decisions and where all the money is going. But mind you, it costs $56 million just to run the board. It was an 8-1 vote. Interestingly, only, where is it? Only one of the most right-wing judges wrote against the decision. Even all those left-wingers wrote that it was a twilight zone of accountability. What the hell does that mean? Okay, it was actually not Title 60, it was Act 60, which was written again under Trump. But of course, Biden had to sign it in 2022, which he didn't have to, of course. And the end result is that land prices in the good areas has gone up enormously because wealthy Americans can buy it up cheaply with their US dollars. So everything around there, all the prices of land has gone up. And of course, the loss of billions of dollars in revenue. So this is a bit silly, Ms. Bonilla writes. Local activists had hoped to voice these concerns to the Vice President when she visited. I mean, are you kidding? As if she's going to sit down at a round table and discuss how the US is destroying Puerto Rico financially. Very, very silly. There was a protest and they chanted Yankee Go Home. My guess there was maybe not even 20 people. And she jokes a little bit, Ms. Bonilla. In a scene reminiscent of the HBO show Veep, the Vice President clapped haplessly along to the Spanish protest songs that greeted her, apparently not realizing the lyrics were critical of her visit. And of course, after briefly experiencing the local culture, Ms. Harris moved on to a fundraising event. Sponsored by a guy called Nicholas Prouty, a very rich guy who's moved south to not pay taxes in the US. And of course, mentions corruption within the Puerto Rican administration. And as I said earlier, she raised $500,000, and that's why she was there in the first place. So, quoting, rather than seek photo ops, the Vice President would have done better to listen more closely to her party's Puerto Rican House members, including Nidia Velázquez and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who have been calling for greater federal oversight over Act 60 beneficiaries, greater scrutiny of the anti-democratic Fiscal Oversight Board, and a true federal commitment to addressing Puerto Rico's status. I'll talk about it in a minute. In the end, Ms. Bonilla writes, Ms. Harris's visit encapsulates the contradictions of US policy toward Puerto Rico. On the one hand, there's a perfunctory nod to grassroots empowerment. On the other, a cozying up to the very forces that are driving gentrification and displacement. While she did not toss paper towels, referring to Kamala Harris, her visit was what Puerto Ricans call a papillon, an embarrassing spectacle. So then I write quite a bit on what I think is going on in Puerto Rico at the moment. I'm going to come back and read that, and I'll end up after I read that. But I've written and cut and pasted Hawaii's long road to becoming America's 50th state, how that became a state, and I give my reasons. And that is the end of the article itself. I've added timeline, Trump's response to the crisis in Puerto Rico and how he totally failed and actually stopped them getting power, probably by months, the same way he handled the COVID problem. And an interesting article, actually, pro-Trump PAC spars with DeSantis over Puerto Rican statehood. And I've got two articles on that, Act 60 explained. And I've cut and pasted some of the article on that Act 60. But of course it does nothing except American citizens who transfer there and live there 6 months can get a tax break, and all these other advantages they can get. And I have in big red letters the real problem, and that is the unelected board governing Puerto Rico will continue to operate in secret. Ms. Bonilla mentions them. I have a big article. It's an interesting article. I have read all the articles I cross-reference and refer to. Now I'll go back and read my conclusion. Ms. Bonilla, her anger should be more vociferous, but she mainly focused on the visit by Harris. Yes, it was a fundraising photo op visit only. She could have mentioned the scant coverage by US media, the partial destruction of the island of Vieques, where cancer rates are very high from bombing by US in testing munitions over 20 years ago. They finally stopped, but the cancer rates are unbelievably high, and the cleanup process is incredibly slow, and the people there are still dying. She's not an aggressive writer anyway. She's aligned with the strong but non-aggressive media online outlet, more factual than emotional, called publicbooks.org. And I read two articles, one on Trump's machete tweets, which I found very interesting. And it's a radio, his tweets, and compares to the radio messages and lectures, whatever, Hitler made during his lead up to power and in power, his speeches. It was a really good article. I really enjoyed it. Also, Ms. Bonilla cannot be too aggressive in her writings, as we know, and I mentioned in Media Failures, in the previous podcast called Media Failures, you have to be careful what you say and who you talk and write about. Her livelihood does depend on articles like this, and of course she can't be very, very negative. And my notes again, how is Puerto Rico going to achieve statehood? The same for the Virgin Islands or Guam. All these are territories that want to become states of the USA. Hawaii managed to, but I think Hawaii and Alaska are too strategically placed for them not to become states. If that is true, I mean, I say that, but then why is not Guam? I mean, it's as good as a state, except this is what I write next. Because there is no heart, there's no political capital, and there's no balls by US politicians. Also, these two statehoods happened long ago, even though Guam was a critical island during the Second World War. And it would alter the balance of the Senate towards the Democrats. Almost all these places would, more than likely, the senators would be Democratic. And to become a state, it would take, my guess, to get it through the government, the different wings of government, that it would take at least 8 years, and it would take an extremely strong Democratic president to achieve this. So I'm going to post this article with all my notes and references, and it'll be the same title and everything as my previous 4 articles with text only. And as you know, do that because if you happen to go through the whole video, you probably won't go through all my notes and the article itself, and it makes the video too long and it disrupts the algorithm for YouTube. So that's why, of course, I split it up. So thanks for watching. Hopefully my next one will be something very close to my heart. All my videos are, in fact, but I mentioned it in a negative video I did on Dr. Mike, when he had a conversation with a guy called Harry Jowsey, which I found it personally insulting. And I'm not a fan of Dr. Mike, a bit of a charlatan. And he talked about childhood trauma, and I will get into that in my next video, and also a major reference back and forth between my thoughts and Gabor Mate. Anyway, thank you. See you in the next one.